I'm Emily Carter, 36 years old, and most days my life feels like a long string of wires, circuits, and the occasional small miracle that keeps the lights on in half of Phoenix. I spend my mornings in steel toe boots and a canvas work jacket, climbing ladders, tracing problems through breaker panels, and answering questions from men who still raise an eyebrow when a woman shows up to fix something they couldn't. It's not glamorous, but it's mine, and I built every inch of it with stubbornness and overtime. Come with me a second. By the time evening rolled in, the sky had turned a dusty orange. Nathan arrived home a little later than usual. He looked tired, emotionally drained, but still affectionate. He brushed a hand along my shoulder as he passed me in the kitchen and asked about dinner. I could not bring myself to look at him. The lipstick cap echoed too loudly in my mind. He ate quickly and said he needed to prepare for the next morning. He carried his laptop upstairs. When I heard his study door click closed, I felt the tension in my shoulders twist. I sat on the couch staring at the blank television screen. Everything felt suspended, as if I were waiting for a storm I could smell but not yet see. After a long stretch of silence, I went upstairs to the study door. I stood outside for a moment, debating whether to knock, before I could. I heard his voice through the door, soft and low, not the tone he used with clients, not the tone he used with me. I stepped back, careful not to make noise. I waited at the top of the stairs until the murmur stopped. When the door finally opened, he looked startled to see me. He said he had been on the phone with a colleague. He said he hoped he had not woken me. I nodded even though I had not asked a question. That night, I barely slept. Every sound the house made felt sharper. Every shift Nathan made in the bed felt like an answer I did not want. At sunrise, I gave up trying to rest and sat in the kitchen drinking cold coffee. The day moved slowly, thick with doubt. Around noon, out of habit, I checked the laundry basket in the closet. One of Nathan's shirts was inside out. When I picked it up, I felt a faint trace of unfamiliar perfume. It was not my scent. It was not anything I kept in the house. I sat on the edge of the bed holding the shirt in my hands. My heart beat hard enough to hurt. I did not want to jump to conclusions. I had told myself repeatedly to be rational, but these small crumbs were starting to form a trail. That evening, after dinner, Nathan said he needed to take a short drive to clear his head. He said he would not be long. He kissed the top of my hair, then grabbed his keys and left. I watched from the window as his taillights drifted down the street. The house fell silent again. I sat alone at the kitchen table, listening to that silence and feeling it close in around me. I kept coming back to the same question. Why had Victoria involved herself so intensely? Why had she pressed fear into me before anything concrete had happened? And why had she been so calm about it, almost expectant? She guided me to the side yard beside the rose bushes she planted with my mother last summer. She looked over her shoulder like she was making sure no one followed, then turned to me with an expression I hadn't seen on her face before. Something soft, almost troubled. Sarah texted to check on me. I told her about the perfume. She told me that sometimes people create a diversion when they do not want to be looked at. I stared at that message for a long time because it echoed something I had been trying not to think. I walked into the living room and sat on the couch, pulling my knees under me. The open blinds let in the faint glow of the street lamp. The air conditioning clicked on, the vents humming like an old lullaby. I closed my eyes and tried to steady my breathing. Everything was starting to point towards something I did not want confirmed. My phone buzzed again, another message. This time from my mother. She said she hoped I was doing all right and asked if I needed to talk. Her words felt gentle, but I knew she must have spoken to Victoria again. They rarely reached out unless Victoria had prompted them. I wrote back that I was fine. It was easier than explaining the truth, which I barely understood myself. I turned off the living room lights and stood in the dim glow of the hallway. The house felt heavy, crowded with things unspoken. If I had listened closely, I swear I could almost hear something shifting beneath the surface of my life, a faint cracking sound before stone breaks. When Nathan returned, he looked refreshed, almost oddly upbeat. He asked if I wanted tea, as if all the day's recent tension had not existed. I told him no. I went upstairs early. He followed later, humming lightly, a tune I did not recognize. I lay in bed, staring at the shadowed ceiling, thinking of the map Sarah had shown me, the perfume on his shirt, The way Victoria kept appearing right when doubt grew strongest. None of it felt random anymore. It felt like pieces sliding into place, slow enough to torment me, fast enough that I could not look away. At some point, I drifted into a shallow sleep. But even in sleep, I felt that sense of something approaching, something close now, something I could almost reach out and touch, but not yet see clearly. And when I woke the next morning, that feeling had only sharpened. The feeling stayed with me as I got ready for work, a quiet trembling under the surface of everything I did. By the time I stepped outside, the sun had barely risen, and the air already held the kind of dry heat that promised a long day. I kept thinking about the perfume, the coordinates Sarah had found, the way Nathan had walked through the house last night like a man who had nothing to worry about. That confidence unsettled me most. Work was mercifully busy. I spent the morning rewiring a junction box on the west side of Phoenix and crawling through an attic that smelled like insulation and old dust. For a few hours, the physical labor drowned out the noise in my head, but the moment I climbed back into my truck, the worry returned like it had been waiting for me. "Emily, I'm worried about you." My phone buzzed. It was Sarah again. She had pulled an updated maintenance log and asked if she could call. I answered right away. She said the new coordinates showed a pattern, something more precise than before. Nathan's car had been in the same neighborhood near Glendale several evenings over the past month. Not the same house number, but within one street. She said it was unusual because most routes stay consistent unless someone is visiting a specific area. My pulse quickened. The area she mentioned was not far from where Victoria lived. I thanked her and told her I would keep her updated. After we hung up, I sat with my hands on the steering wheel, staring at the rows of palm trees lining the street. I could not pretend anymore that these signals meant nothing. Something was happening. And whatever it was happening close to home. When I got back to my neighborhood, I planned to go inside and take a shower. Instead, I noticed 3 women from the retirees group down the block standing near Jean's mailbox. Chatting as they watered their yards, they waved at me like they always did. I walked over, mostly to distract myself. But Jean stopped watering her roses when she saw me approach. Her eyes softened. "Emily, honey, you look tired." I said I had been dealing with long workdays. She nodded knowingly and said that young people push themselves too hard. She glanced at the street and added something that made the breath leave my body. "We saw your husband the other day. He sure gets around this neighborhood in the afternoons." I tried to keep my expression neutral. I asked when. Claire chimed in that they had seen his car more than once around 3 or 4 o'clock, usually heading toward the side of the community where the larger homes were. They thought he might have a client there. Then Martha added that she had seen him take the Glendale turnoff last week around sunset. She laughed lightly as if nothing about that comment had weight. But my heart dropped. I thanked them and made my way back toward my driveway. I could feel my pulse in my throat. They had no reason to lie. They did not even know what I had suspected. To them it was just neighborly observation. To me it was confirmation that something was deeply wrong. That alone was strange enough to make me pause. Victoria worried about everyone in theory, but rarely in practice. She put a hand on her hip, exhaled slowly, and lowered her voice. Inside, the house felt dim and cool, a sharp contrast to the heat outside. I took a glass of water to the dining table and stared at the surface of it until my reflection blurred. I did not know if I wanted the truth or if I wanted to keep pretending a little longer. Part of me wanted to dig further. Another part hoped desperately that everything could still be explained away. As if summoned by my thoughts, my phone lit up with a message. It was from Victoria. She said she had been praying again and felt moved to check in. She asked how things were between me and Nathan. She added a second message saying she hoped I had not taken her warning too lightly. I stared at the screen, unable to reply. The timing was too perfect. She always reached out when doubt was at its highest, as if she could feel exactly when I was losing steadiness. I put the phone down and stood in the middle of the living room, hands on my hips, trying to breathe through the knot in my stomach. I kept hearing Sarah's voice in my mind. People who have something to hide often create a distraction. I exhaled slowly and picked up my keys. I told myself I was just going out for air. I drove around the block, down the main road, and toward the edge of the neighborhood where the small commercial district sat. I parked near the grocery store, walked the aisles aimlessly, and ended up near the pharmacy without remembering how I got there. That was when I saw another small sign that made my skin prickle. A clerk was stocking the discount shelf with makeup items. One of the brands matched the lipstick cap I had found in the trash. I stood there too long, staring at the color labels. The clerk asked if I needed help. I said no and walked away quickly, feeling my heart thudding in my ears. On the drive home, something in me shifted. I could not keep floating in the uncertainty. Whatever was happening, I needed to see it clearly. I needed to stop hoping the truth would reveal itself and start looking for it myself. By the time I pulled into my driveway, the sun had dipped low enough to cast long shadows across the street. I stepped out of the truck and saw Ryan's car parked near my house. He was standing beside it, arms crossed, staring at the sky as if dealing with his own thoughts. He looked startled when he saw me, then gave a tight smile. I walked over to him because it felt necessary. "Have you noticed anything off about Nathan lately?" He said he had been out for a drive and happened to be near my street. I did not believe that, but I did not press him. He looked worn down, older than he had just a month ago. I asked if everything was all right. He ran a hand over his face and said things at home had been strange. He said Victoria had been coming and going at odd hours. He said she had missed 2 dinners with the kids in the past week and claimed she was buried in lesson planning. But he paused before finishing, then added quietly that something just did not feel right anymore. I felt the air change between us, not because he suspected what I suspected, but because both of us carried the same uneasy weight, though for different reasons. He sighed heavily and got into his car, saying he should head home before the kids wondered where he was. I watched him pull away, feeling a new heaviness settle inside me. If even Ryan felt something slipping, then whatever this was had spread further than I realized. That evening I tried to make dinner, but ended up pushing the food around my plate. Nathan came home later than usual. He apologized, said traffic was bad, said he had been caught in a long end-of-day discussion. His voice was steady, but he did not kiss me hello like he usually did. He mentioned he might have to work through the weekend. I nodded even though my stomach twisted. When he went upstairs, my phone buzzed again. Another message from Victoria. This one shorter. "Trust your instincts." I stared at those 3 words until my vision tightened. I set the phone face down and felt a wave of dread roll through me. Not the kind that comes from fear of the unknown, but the kind that comes when you finally realize the truth has been there all along, waiting for you to stop pretending you cannot see it. I sat perfectly still in the dim kitchen, the hum of the refrigerator the only sound in the room. The last threads of denial were coming undone, and I knew it. Every sign pointed in one direction. Every instinct told me the same thing. And by the time I stood from the table, the decision had already formed inside me, heavy and undeniable. My stomach tightened before I could even think. I tried to play it cool, shrugged, said he had been stressed with work, which was true enough. But the way she kept studying me made my skin prickle. I needed to confront the truth, not later, not eventually, but soon. I walked through the house with the decision settling deeper inside me. Heavy and steady, the kind of certainty that grows when you finally stop arguing with yourself. I did not know how the truth would appear, but I knew it was close enough that every breath felt tight in my chest. The next day dragged by in slow, heavy hours. I spent the morning checking circuits on a commercial site near Tempe, trying to focus on the hum of equipment and the chatter of my crew. But my mind refused to settle. Every time I paused to wipe sweat from my neck or reach for a tool, I kept replaying the past weeks, the perfume, the restaurant receipt, the coordinates near Glendale, the lipstick cap. Victoria's warning said with too much softness, too much timing. By early afternoon, the heat had climbed high enough to shimmer above the pavement. I finished the job, signed off on the work order, and drove home in silence. My hands were sweating on the steering wheel, even with the air conditioning running. Something in me knew the day would not end quietly. Around 5:30, Nathan came into the kitchen wearing a shirt I had never seen him wear to work. Dark navy, sleeves rolled neatly, a faint cologne I did not recognize. He said he had a team dinner, one of those end-of-quarter morale events his company liked to host. He said he might be a little late getting home. He set his keys on the counter and reached for his wallet without meeting my eyes for more than a second. My heart dropped. Sales managers at MedPro Diagnostics did not dress like that for team dinners. They met in crowded chain restaurants and wore the same work clothes they had worn all day. I had seen enough of those events when Nathan first joined the company. I kept my voice steady and asked where the dinner was. He said somewhere downtown, but he did not give a name. He touched my shoulder lightly before heading for the door. The touch felt rehearsed. Something inside me went very still. The moment his car disappeared down the street, I called Sarah. I told her he had left, dressed for something other than a casual work dinner. I could hear the shift in her breath. She asked if I wanted company. I said yes. She arrived 15 minutes later, hair pulled into a loose braid, badge still clipped to her belt from her shift. She did not ask what I planned to do. She already knew. We pulled up the vehicle app tied to Nathan's dealership service history. The last known location tag lit up on the screen. It was not downtown. It was not anywhere near a restaurant. It was on a residential street only a few blocks from where he had parked on other nights. I'm only saying this because I care. Someone at church mentioned seeing Nathan talking very closely with a woman I didn't recognize last week. And at the grocery store, I thought I saw him with someone near the pharmacy aisle. I didn't want to assume anything, but it didn't look like a business conversation. Sarah looked at me carefully, giving me space to change my mind. I nodded instead. The silence between us felt tight and charged as she started the car. The drive was short, but every second felt stretched thin. Houses passed by in neat rows, desert landscaping glowing under the softening evening light. I watched the map on her phone as the location pin grew closer. My pulse beat a sharp rhythm in my ears. We turned onto a quiet street lined with tall mesquite trees. The sun was dropping low, painting everything in gold. And then I saw it. Nathan's car, parked in my own driveway. For a moment, everything inside me stopped. My house. He was inside my house. He had told me he was going downtown. He had driven around the block and come right back here. Sarah parked down the street. She turned toward me, waiting for my reaction. But I could not speak. My skin felt hot. My fingers numb. I stepped out of the car, every sound too loud. A dog barked somewhere far away. A sprinkler clicked on in a neighbor's yard. My own breath felt sharp as glass. We walked slowly up the driveway. The porch light was off, but a faint glow came from upstairs. I reached for the front door. It was unlocked. He never left it unlocked. Inside, the house smelled faintly like the perfume on his shirt. Sweet, floral, something that did not belong to me. The living room was quiet. There was a faint rustle from upstairs. My legs moved before my mind caught up. I climbed the steps, each footfall trembling beneath me. At the top of the landing, I heard voices. Not loud, but close enough that I recognized the tones. Nathan's low murmur, a woman's soft laugh, a laugh I had heard my entire life. My throat went dry. I asked who the woman was, but she shook her head, said she only got a glimpse. Then she leaned in closer. Victoria. I felt the blood drain from my face. I moved forward, slow and deliberate, each step fueled by something deeper than anger. Something that had been building for weeks, maybe months, maybe years. When I reached the bedroom door, it was cracked open. Light spilled through the gap. I pushed it open. Everything that followed happened in fragments. Victoria on my bed, her hair loose around her shoulders, Nathan leaning over her, touching her with a familiarity that made my stomach twist. Their bodies too close, too bare, too comfortable. Her voice, soft and breathless, telling him she had missed him. His voice answering that I never understood him the way she did, that I was too naive, too careful, too wrapped up in my own world to notice what he needed. The words struck harder than anything physical could have. Then Victoria's head turned. The moment her eyes met mine, she froze. Nathan jerked back, scrambling for the sheets like modesty mattered now. I stepped into the room. My body felt distant from my thoughts. I heard my own voice, calm and steady in a way that scared me. I asked Nathan how long this had been going on. I asked Victoria why she had warned me while slipping into my marriage behind my back. Men don't always show they're slipping. You have to stay ahead of it. Neither answered. Their mouths opened and closed, but no sound came out. Shame flashed across Victoria's face. Then something sharper, almost defensive. Nathan muttered something about accidents and confusion and mistakes, but his voice wavered. Sarah stood in the hallway behind me, silent and unmoving, like a witness anchoring me in place. I walked closer, my hands trembling but controlled. I looked at my sister, the girl who had shared my childhood, my room, my memories, and asked her why. She whispered that she had been lonely, that Nathan had cared, that it had not meant to become this. She said she had only tried to protect me from being blindsided. Her words felt like acid. I could not respond. Nathan reached for me, asking me to sit, to talk, to let him explain. I stepped back and told him to get dressed and leave my house. He tried to speak again, but I repeated the order, louder this time. My voice echoed off the walls. Victoria wrapped the sheet around herself, her face pale and tight. She stood slowly, eyes shining with something that looked like fear or guilt or both. I told her to leave too. The house felt smaller as they gathered their things. Nathan kept saying my name, but each time I turned away, Victoria avoided my eyes entirely. When they finally stepped past me and down the stairs, I felt something inside me give way, a crack followed by a strange hollow calm. I listened to their footsteps fade, listened to the front door open, listened to it close again. The silence afterward felt enormous. I stood alone in the bedroom they had stained with their betrayal, the evening light fading around me, the truth laid bare in every corner. I stared at her. This was coming from the woman who once lectured me for an hour about trusting my marriage, about believing the best in people even when they disappoint you. Now she was the one planting seeds of doubt. Sarah placed a hand on my shoulder, steady and warm, and I finally exhaled. Everything had changed, and the storm I had sensed for weeks had broken open at last. I stayed in the doorway a long time after Sarah's hand lifted from my shoulder. The house felt stripped bare, every sound sharp in the quiet. I walked down the stairs slowly, steadying myself on the rail because my legs were still trembling. When I reached the bottom, I saw the front door closed and the porch light glowing outside. They were gone. The damage was not. Sarah followed me into the kitchen and asked softly if I wanted her to stay. I told her no. I needed to face what came next on my own. She nodded, touched my arm, and left through the side door. When the door clicked shut, the silence pressed in again, heavier than before. I sat at the table and tried to breathe. 100 memories passed through my mind like a reel I did not want to watch. Every holiday dinner, every family prayer, every moment I had trusted both of them. They tangled together until the ache in my chest felt almost physical. At some point, I must have fallen asleep at the table because the next thing I heard was my phone vibrating. I blinked awake, disoriented, and saw my mother's name on the screen. My throat tightened. I knew who had called her. I knew what story she had heard. I did not answer. A minute later, my father called. Then my mother again. Then Victoria. The calls came one after another until I turned the ringer off and pressed my palms against my eyes. I knew they would not let it go. My family had always treated problems like stains on a carpet. Cover it fast, scrub it hard, pretend it never happened. By midday, the house felt too small, so I stepped outside into the hot Arizona light. I walked to my truck, sat inside for a moment, and then drove without thinking. My hands led me to my parents' house, even though I had not planned it. When I pulled into their driveway, I saw all the familiar cars lined up. My stomach sank. I knocked once out of habit and stepped inside. The living room was full. My parents stood near the fireplace. Victoria sat on the couch wrapped in a blanket like a fragile child. Nathan sat in an armchair with a bandage on his cheek, avoiding my eyes. My father told me to sit. I stayed standing. After 12 years in the field, I finally bought my own townhouse back in 2018. It's a small place in a quiet neighborhood near Glendale, nothing fancy. But the first time I held the keys, I cried in the driveway with a sandwich in one hand and a loan packet in the other. I thought it was the first real sign that I had caught up with the life everyone expected me to have. Marriage, stability, respectability. All those things people in my family whispered about during church potlucks. Victoria, where is this coming from? My mother said she had heard what happened and that she was deeply disappointed in me. For a moment, I could not process the words. She said I had caused a scene. She said I had used violence. She said I had struck Nathan. She spoke as though I had walked into the home of a stranger and attacked an innocent man. I shook my head slowly and felt my voice rise in my throat. I told them that I had found my husband in my bed with my sister. My mother lifted her chin and said that no matter what mistakes had been made, family comes first and I should have handled it quietly. Victoria whimpered into the blanket. It sounded rehearsed, delicate, carefully timed. My father moved closer to her. protective and stern, glaring at me as though I were the threat. I asked why no one was asking how I felt. Why none of them were asking why she had done it. Why they were not furious at Nathan. My father said anger is a weakness and that I needed to calm down. I felt something inside me snap at that. I told him that watching your life rupture in a single moment has a way of making calm impossible. He stepped closer, voice low and firm. He said that what I had done was unacceptable, that hitting Nathan was unforgivable, that I was putting the family reputation in danger. I felt heat rise in my face. I reminded him of what had actually happened, that Nathan and Victoria had violated my trust in the worst possible way. My father interrupted me and said I needed to stop making everything about me. The room went quiet. I heard the air conditioner click on, a steady hum filling the gap. Then my mother said they needed me to apologize, not for what they had done, but for the way I had reacted. She said forgiveness is the only path forward. She said Victoria was already in enough pain and that I should not add to it. She said Nathan was a good man who had made a human mistake. A mistake, that word echoed inside me like a dull blow. I looked at Nathan. He would not look back. I looked at Victoria. Her eyes were red, but her expression held something harder beneath the surface. Something like expectation. As if all of this was unfolding exactly the way she believed it should. She gave a sad little smile, the kind she used on her students when they failed a test she thought they should have passed. My father cleared his throat. He said there was another matter, that Ryan was filing for divorce and seeking full custody, that it would be a nightmare for the family if the courts made everything public, that Victoria needed legal help. And then he said the number, 40,000. For a moment I could not breathe. He said it as if asking for a ride to the airport. He said I had a good job. He said I could ease the burden. He said supporting my sister was my duty. My mother nodded vigorously beside him, gripping Victoria's hand as if the request was sacred. I stared at them, numb and stunned. I asked why I would ever pay for the consequences of something she had chosen. My mother looked offended by the question. My father said I needed to watch my tone. He stepped closer. His jaw tightened. His eyes narrowed. He said I was tearing the family apart by refusing to help. Then he slapped me. The sound was sharp, shocking, hot against my cheek. I stumbled back, tasting metal in my mouth. The room spun for a moment, everything too bright and too quiet. No one moved toward me. No one asked if I was all right. My mother rushed to Victoria instead. She checked her face as if she were the one harmed. Nathan shifted uncomfortably but remained silent, small and pitiful in his chair. My father told me to collect myself and speak respectfully. Something inside me settled in that moment. Clear and final, I straightened, wiped my cheek with the back of my hand, and told them I was done. With the conversation, with the demands, with their refusal to see truth for what it was. My mother gasped. My father told me not to raise my voice. I told him I was not raising it, that I had never been clearer in my life. I just don't want you to be blindsided like some women I know. I wish someone had warned them. I turned and walked to the door. No one followed. No one tried to stop me. No one called my name. When I stepped outside, the heat wrapped around me in a thick wave. I walked to my truck, opened the door, and sat down. My hands trembled on the steering wheel, but my mind felt still for the first time in days. I started the engine and backed out of the driveway. The house grew smaller in the rearview mirror, its windows glowing in the afternoon sun, each one holding a version of my family I no longer recognized. By the time I reached the end of the street, my breathing had steadied, but a hollow ache had opened inside me, wide and deep. The people who were supposed to protect me had chosen their own illusions instead. And I drove home knowing that nothing about my life would ever look the same again. I drove home knowing that nothing about my life would ever look the same again. And that truth settled over me like the dry evening heat. When I pulled into my driveway, I sat in the truck for a long moment, hands still trembling, watching the porch light blink on automatically. The house looked exactly the same as it had that morning, but I felt like I was stepping into a life that had already fallen apart. Inside, everything was still. I walked through the living room, touching the back of the couch, the edge of the dining table, grounding myself in the familiar shapes. I did not cry. I expected I might, but all that came was a strange quiet inside my chest. "Sarah called?" I answered. and she did not say anything at first. She must have heard something in my breathing because her voice softened as she asked if I was safe. I told her yes. I told her everything else felt broken, but I was safe. She asked if she needed to come over. I said no. She said she would keep her phone beside her all night. After we hung up, I went upstairs and stripped the sheets from my bed. I opened every window and let the warm night air sweep through the room as I worked. It felt symbolic, though I did not plan it that way. I just needed the air to change. For the next few days, everything moved in a strange, slow rhythm. I worked long hours, grateful for the distraction of wires and switches. I came home exhausted, cooked simple meals, and sat in silence listening to the refrigerator hum. I avoided calls from my parents. I ignored the few texts Victoria sent, each one shorter than the last. For a moment, I wondered if she was talking about herself. Her eyes flicked toward the house, toward where Ryan was sitting with Nathan, and something unreadable passed across her face. By Friday morning, the neighborhood was buzzing. Small, subtle glances from people walking their dogs, conversations that stopped when I passed. I knew how fast stories traveled in our community, especially when those stories involved people who had spent their lives claiming moral high ground. But the shift became unmistakable when Ryan called. His voice was tight, controlled, but underneath it was a trembling anger I had never heard from him. He asked if he could pick up the kids from my parents' house. He said he needed to talk. I drove over and met him in the driveway. He was holding a stack of documents, his hands visibly shaking. He told me he had filed for divorce that morning. He said the lawyer told him to gather everything related to the marriage, including any evidence of infidelity. He said he had found more than he expected. I asked what that meant. He looked down at the papers and then back at me with raw exhaustion in his eyes. He had found credit card charges made by Victoria for dinners and hotel bookings she claimed were for professional development events. He had found matching dates on Nathan's travel stipend reports. He had found messages on the family computer that Victoria thought she had deleted. Reminders, confirmations, excuses. It felt like the ground shifted under me. I had only seen a small corner of the betrayal. Ryan had seen the whole map. He said he was asking for full custody. He said he did not trust Victoria around the kids. He said he did not know who she had become. I told him I understood. He nodded once, as if that acknowledgement held more meaning than anything else could have, and drove away to gather the boys. That afternoon, the first ripple of consequences reached Nathan. I was eating a late lunch when I heard a car door slam outside. Nathan stood on my porch, holding a small bouquet of cheap flowers wrapped in cellophane. His face was drawn and pale, his jaw tense. When I did not move to open the door, he knocked again. I cracked it open just enough to make it clear he was not coming inside. He said he wanted to apologize. He said he was confused. He said he did not know how things had gotten so out of hand. He told me that his boss had called him in that morning because a major clinic had canceled 2 upcoming contracts. Someone in that clinic was connected to the church. Someone had talked. Before I could ask, Mom called her name and she straightened instantly. She squeezed my arm one more time. His words poured out, frantic. But I felt nothing. He asked if we could talk inside. I told him no. He lifted the flowers and said he brought them because he wanted to make things right. I told him they did not belong here. After a moment, he set them down on the porch and walked away without looking back. The flowers stayed outside until the wind knocked them over and the plastic wraps scraped against the concrete. I left them there. Saturday, word spread even faster. Jean from down the street stopped me as I was getting the mail. She asked gently if things were all right. I said I was fine. She did not ask more, but she patted my arm in a way that meant she knew enough and cared enough not to pry. At church on Sunday, I did not go inside. I sat in the parking lot under a tree, engine off, windows cracked. I could see people walking into the sanctuary. Several looked around, whispering to each other. A few older women glanced toward the parking lot, recognizing my truck, their expressions soft with sympathy. Then I saw Victoria. She walked across the lot with her shoulders hunched, wearing a long cardigan even though the temperature was climbing. People moved aside as she passed. Some nodded politely, others avoided eye contact. She reached the front of the building and paused, breathing deeply. For a moment I thought she might turn around and leave. Instead, she walked inside. I drove away. Later that afternoon, my mother called again. This time I answered. Her voice was strained and tight, the tone she used when she was holding herself together with a thin thread of control. She said the bishop had spoken privately with Victoria. She said there would be a disciplinary review. She said the community was reacting unfairly. Then she said something that made my entire body go cold. She said Nathan had been asked not to attend the next church meeting until the review was complete. She said people were gossiping about him. She said his job might be at risk. She spoke as if the real tragedy was how this all affected him. Just pay attention, okay? If something feels wrong, it usually is. I asked if she had anything to say about what had happened to me. She went silent, then repeated that forgiveness was important. I hung up. The next few days were filled with more fallout. Nathan's company placed him on a performance warning after another client pulled out. Rumors had reached the medical community. His numbers dropped. He called twice, then 3 times, then stopped calling when I refused to answer. As for Victoria, word spread that her position at the school was being reviewed. A parent had overheard something and brought it to the administration. I could picture her sitting in a small office under cold fluorescent lights, waiting for a decision she never thought she would face. Part of me wanted to feel pity. That part never won. By Thursday evening, I finally gathered the courage to take the last step. I opened the closet and began removing everything Nathan owned: shirts, ties, the cologne he bought last Christmas, the drawer of casual clothes he had left for weekends. I carried each armful to the driveway and dropped it in the center of the concrete. The pile grew quickly. By the time I finished, the sky had gone soft and gold. A car turned onto my street, Nathan's. He got out slowly when he saw the pile. His mouth tightened. He asked me if this was necessary. I said yes. He asked if we could talk. I said no. He asked if I was ever going to stop punishing him. I looked at him and felt not rage, but clarity. This was not punishment, it was closure. I turned and walked inside before he could say more. Through the peephole, I watched him gather his clothes in stiff silence. His shoulders slumped as he worked. When he finally loaded everything into his car, he stood there for a moment staring at the front of the house like he expected me to open the door. I did not. Then she walked away, leaving me standing alone between 2 rose bushes that suddenly smelled too sharp, too sweet, too fake. He drove away without looking back. When his taillights disappeared into the evening, a strange stillness settled over me. Not peace exactly, but the space where peace might someday grow. I locked the door and leaned against it, breathing slowly in the quiet house that finally belonged to me again. But the week was not finished yet, and the storm had one more place to land before it truly broke apart. The storm had one more place to land before it truly broke apart, and it arrived in the form of a knock on my front door 2 weeks later, long after the neighborhood gossip had cooled into quiet murmurs and Nathan's name had stopped appearing on caller ID. It was just after 8 in the evening. I had returned from a late shift, showered, and changed into a soft cotton shirt, hoping for a quiet night. I was sitting on the couch with a mug of chamomile tea, letting the warmth sink into my hands, when the knock came. It was not urgent or loud. It sounded hesitant, almost apologetic. For a few seconds I did not move. I had learned that nothing good ever arrived at night, especially when it came wrapped in hesitation. When I finally stood and opened the door, I froze. Victoria was standing on my porch. Her hair was uneven, as if she had cut it herself. The cardigan she wore hung crooked on her frame. Her eyes were red and swollen, and the mascara smudges along her cheeks told me she had given up trying to hide how hard the past weeks had hit her. Her arms were wrapped around herself, fingers gripping the sleeves like she was holding herself together. I stayed out there longer than I meant to, trying to swallow the unease crawling through my chest. Nathan had been distant lately, but he had always been warm with me, patient even on our bad days. We had talked about starting a family next year. He had helped me repaint the townhouse. He had told my parents that I was the most capable woman he had ever met, something they still brought up proudly. She whispered my name, almost fragile. I need to talk to you. Every instinct in me screamed to close the door, to protect what little piece I had rebuilt. But something rooted me to the spot. Not compassion, not curiosity, something closer to closure. A need to hear the last missing pieces of a story that had already torn both of our lives open. I stepped aside just enough to signal she could speak, but not enough to let her inside. She took a shaky breath and stayed on the porch. "Everything is gone," she said. The words sounded small, like she had rehearsed them but could not find the strength behind them anymore. Ryan has full custody. I am living with Mom and Dad in that tiny apartment off Indian School Road. The school suspended me. They might fire me. I cannot get anything back. I watched her face, waiting for guilt or ownership or something that resembled understanding. Instead, her voice cracked, and she pressed her fingers against her lips. I know you have no reason to believe me, she said, but I never meant for this to happen. I was lonely. I was angry at Ryan for being gone so much. And Nathan was there. He made me feel seen again. He told me things I wanted to hear, things I had not heard in years. I folded my arms across my chest. The breeze lifted the edge of her cardigan, revealing a thin wrist and a shaking hand. I felt no satisfaction in her unraveling. Betrayal never gives that kind of reward, only a hollow echo that feels too heavy to carry. She wiped her eyes clumsily. I know I lied to you, she whispered. I know I twisted your trust. I know I warned you about Nathan so you would look anywhere but at me. I know what I did. She choked on the last word, like it hurt to say, and I'm so sorry, Emily. But Victoria's words dug deeper than I wanted to admit. She would never risk damaging the perfect image she had unless she thought it mattered, or unless she knew something she wasn't saying. The apology hung in the air between us. I waited to feel something, anger, relief, forgiveness. None of it came. I asked her why she was really here. Not the vague reasons, the true one. Victoria looked down at the porch boards, then lifted her eyes, which were raw and pleading. I need money. The words landed with a dull thud in my chest. Of course that was where this would lead. She rushed on, stumbling over her explanation. I just need a little to stop the foreclosure notice. Mom and Dad are drowning. They co-signed my legal loan, and now the bank is threatening to take their apartment. I cannot find a job. People know, they search my name and they know. Her voice cracked again and she pressed both hands to her face. When she lowered them, tears streaked down her cheeks in uneven lines. Please, she whispered, I cannot do this alone. I do not have anywhere else to turn. I stared at her a long time, feeling the rise and fall of my breath. In another life, in another version of our childhood, I might have reached for her. I might have tried to fix it. I might have tried to save her. But the girl who once cleaned up her messes no longer lived here. When I finally rejoined the family, Nathan flashed me his usual easy grin from the couch. It hit me differently now, like the light in it wasn't reaching his eyes. I asked her something quietly. Why did you come to me, and not Mom and Dad? She winced. They already gave everything they had. She swallowed hard. You always had more strength, more independence, more stability. She hesitated. And deep down, I thought you still cared enough to help. A long silence stretched between us. The porch light buzzed softly above our heads. Somewhere down the street, a car door slammed. A dog barked once and fell quiet. When I finally spoke, I kept my voice steady. You came here because you thought I would save you again. You thought I would carry the weight of your choices just like I always did. You thought my forgiveness would be the same as before, but it is not. Her face crumpled. Her breathing quickened. I stepped back, not far, but enough to draw a line between the past and the present. I cannot give you what you are asking for. I said, not the money, not the rescue, not the version of me who kept everything together while you tore it apart. Victoria stared at me as though she did not fully understand the words. Then slowly her expression twisted, grief mixing with disbelief. She took a step forward but stopped when she saw my hand rise slightly, signaling her not to. I am truly sorry for what you're going through, I said, but your suffering is the result of choices you made, not mine. Those consequences are yours to face, not mine to fix, son. For as long as I can remember, my family has lived inside a glass box built from appearances. My parents, Michael and Helen, have lived in Phoenix their whole lives and have never once missed a Sunday service. They raised 2 daughters, one fit perfectly inside their pretty polished expectations. One didn't. Dad called everyone to eat. Mom fussed over the potato salad. Victoria chatted with Nathan as if nothing had happened. And I sat at the table, smiling where appropriate, laughing when expected, while a quiet fear tightened inside me. Her lips parted, then closed again. Her shoulders shook. She wiped her face, smearing the tears into uneven streaks. So that is it, she whispered. You are really not going to help me. I felt something tighten inside my chest, a small ache, old and familiar. But I did not waver. No, I said, I am not. She stared at me a moment longer, then let out a sound I had never heard from her before. Not anger, not entitlement. Something broken. She backed away from the porch, cardigan shifting around her like a loose shell. She walked down the sidewalk slowly, shoulders slumped, her steps uneven. She did not look back. The streetlight washed her in pale yellow as she disappeared around the corner. When she was gone, I closed the door gently, not harshly, not triumphantly, just firmly enough that the latch caught without a rattle. I stood there, hand on the doorknob, breathing through the hollow ache inside me. I went to the couch and sat in the dark, letting the quiet settle again. The air felt cooler now, as if something heavy had finally left the room. It was not victory. It was not revenge. It was simply the truth. If something feels wrong, it usually is. And by the time I turned off the last light and walked upstairs, I realized something I had not understood until that moment. The worst part of losing a family is learning they were already gone long before you let them go. The house was still, the night deep and silent, and for the first time in months, I fell asleep quickly. But the story was not finished yet. There was one more knock coming, one I never expected. I fell asleep quickly, and for the first time in months, my dreams were quiet. The house held a stillness that felt almost gentle. Morning sunlight came through the blinds in soft stripes, warming the hardwood floor and brushing my feet with a kind of delicate familiarity. Life had not returned to normal, but it had settled into something steady, something that belonged only to me. Weeks passed, each one calmer than the last. I worked long hours and earned a promotion I had spent years hoping for. I passed the final requirements for my master electrician certification and celebrated with a quiet dinner alone, smiling at the thought that some victories do not need an audience. I finished renovating a small rental condo in Scottsdale and found tenants who loved the space. Slowly, the pieces of my life began shifting back into place, though not the same place they had once occupied. My parents and I kept our distance. My mother sent 2 short texts around the holidays, both polite and strained. My father did not contact me at all. I did not expect anything different. The dynamic between us had been cracked long before I ever realized it. Victoria never reached out again. One night in early spring, I sat on my back porch with a blanket over my lap, listening to the hum of crickets and the faint breeze moving through the mesquite trees. The sky glowed deep blue, fading into night. My thoughts were calm, my breathing steady. I felt almost peaceful. That was when I heard another knock at the front door, not hesitant like before, not frantic, just a soft, steady knock, as if the person on the other side was mustering courage with every second. I wrapped the blanket tighter around my shoulders and walked through the house. When I opened the door, my breath caught. I tried to shake the feeling, but it clung to me all evening. Nathan stood on the porch, thinner than I remembered. His hair was longer and uneven, falling over his forehead. His clothes looked worn, his face was pale, and the dark circles under his eyes looked carved into his skin. He held a small duffel bag at his side, the strap fraying. He looked tired in a way that went deeper than exhaustion, like his life had been hollowed out. He spoke my name softly. I asked what he wanted. I did not open the door any further. I held the frame with one hand, steadying myself against a familiar ache. He said he needed to talk. He asked for just a minute. His voice cracked halfway through the request. I stepped onto the porch and closed the door behind me, leaving only the porch light between us. He ran a hand over his jaw, struggling to begin. He told me he had lost his job 2 weeks after the contracts were canceled. He said his supervisor told him clients were uncomfortable working with someone whose name was tied to a church review and a divorce petition. He said he had tried to restart his life in Denver, but every company he applied to had questions he could not answer cleanly. He said he had come back to Arizona because he had nowhere else to go. I listened without interrupting. The wind rustled through the leaves above us. The neighborhood was quiet, peaceful, as if holding its breath. Nathan took a shaky breath and looked down at his shoes. I wanted to tell you something. I am sorry. Not the kind of sorry a man gives to get himself out of trouble. Not the kind you say because you think it will undo anything. I mean the kind that comes when a man realizes he destroyed every good thing he ever had. That night, back at home, Nathan kissed my forehead and said he loved me more than anything. I nodded, smiled, pretended my heart wasn't beating too fast. His voice trembled and he shook his head. almost in disbelief at himself. He said he had been insecure. He said he had been weak. He said he had lied to himself long before he had lied to me. He said he had convinced himself that Victoria made him feel admired, understood, wanted. He said he had not seen that she had been feeding her own emptiness, not filling his. He said he hurt me. He said he humiliated me. He said he had betrayed my trust more deeply than he could ever repair. When he finally lifted his eyes, I saw the truth in them. Not hope, not expectation, just regret, raw and unprotected. He told me he wanted to ask something. He said he knew he had no right to ask. He said he understood if I slammed the door on him. Then he asked anyway. He asked if there was any chance I could ever take him back. Not today, not soon, but someday. A long quiet settled between us. I let the silence stretch because it needed to. I let the words settle because they deserved to. Then I told him the truth. I told him I believed he was sorry. I told him I believed he regretted what he had done. But regret does not rebuild trust. Regret does not erase betrayal. Regret does not restore the things he had torn apart. I didn't know it yet, but that was the moment my marriage began to split open. Right along the seam Victoria had pressed her finger against. I told him that forgiveness is not the same as reconciliation. He nodded slowly, the understanding landing hard in his expression. I told him I forgave him because I needed that for myself, not because he deserved to come back into my life. A tear slid down his cheek. He wiped it quickly, like a man embarrassed to show how much the words hurt. He whispered that he understood. We stood there in the warm night air, two people who had once shared a life, now standing on opposite sides of a gulf neither of us could cross. When he turned to leave, his shoulders hunched as if carrying the weight of the past year. I felt no triumph, only closure. He walked down the sidewalk slowly, the sound of his footsteps fading with each step. At the end of the street, he paused and looked back once, a faint silhouette under the street lamp. Then he turned and disappeared into the dark. I went inside and locked the door. My heart did not ache the way I had expected. Instead, it felt clear, strong, like something that had finally knit itself back together. A year later, my life looked nothing like the life I thought I wanted. It looked better. It looked honest. I woke early most mornings, brewed coffee, sat on my porch listening to the world wake up. I worked jobs that challenged me. I hiked on weekends. I dated slowly, carefully, letting myself rediscover what trust felt like. My parents still lived in a cramped apartment. Victoria worked part-time at a call center. Nathan resurfaced occasionally around town. Keeping to himself, Ryan remarried a kind woman with a gentle laugh. His boys seemed happy. And everything that came after began with that single warning I never asked for. As for me, I built a small life that no one else had the power to break. And in the quiet of my home, watching the desert sky glow golden and coral, I felt something I never thought I would feel again. Freedom. And if you stayed with me through this entire story, I hope you will share your thoughts or your own experiences in the comments. If you would like to hear more stories like this, stay with the channel, join the community, and let your voice be part of it. I just didn't know where it was leading me yet. The next morning I woke up with a heaviness in my chest that felt strange, like I had slept under something I could not lift. Nathan was already in the kitchen making coffee, humming softly the way he always did when he was in a good mood. He greeted me with a warm smile and asked if I had slept all right. I told him I had, even though it was not true, and he kissed my cheek before heading out early for a meeting. Nothing in his behavior was obviously wrong, but everything in me felt unsettled. I tried to shake it off at work. The day was busy, a string of system checks, and one blown transformer that took half the morning to diagnose. I love my job, but there are moments when being the only woman on site feels like carrying a sandbag over each shoulder. By lunchtime, I was covered in dust and sweat, sitting on the back of the truck eating a stale granola bar. Rick, one of the older techs, walked by and joked that I should not work too hard, or else my husband might forget he had a wife at home. He laughed as if it was nothing, but the comment landed like a stone in my stomach. I kept thinking about what Victoria had said. I kept replaying her expression, the tone she used, the way she watched me afterward, as if waiting for something to crack. Something in her concern had felt too practiced, but I kept reminding myself she was my sister, and sisters warned each other when something felt off. At least that is what I wanted to believe. When my shift ended, I sat in my truck a long time before driving home. The air inside felt too warm, too still. I reached for my phone and called Sarah. She picked up almost immediately and asked what was wrong. I told her everything Victoria had said in that rose-lined side yard. I told her how off balance it left me, how I could not stop thinking about it. Sarah was quiet for a moment, then said in that calm voice she uses at work that sometimes the person pointing the finger is the one hiding something. My sister Victoria is 41, a fifth-grade teacher, motherly in every way, and apparently touched by God if you listen to my parents. Growing up, she glowed in that halo only golden children seem to have. She was prom queen. She married her college sweetheart Ryan. She bought a 2-story place in Glendale with help from my parents. And she collected community awards the way other people collect keychains. Mom never once entered a room without mentioning her. Dad called her the shining example of everything a Carter woman should be. That idea startled me. I had never let myself consider it. But Sarah reminded me that human behavior is rarely straightforward, and that people often protect their own interests first. She told me to keep my eyes open, to take things slow, to watch patterns rather than panic. It helped a little, but when I got home, the unease returned. Nathan was in the living room with his laptop open. He said he had an early sales report to finish. He looked tired but still managed to sound upbeat. I watched him for a while, wondering if something about him had changed or if I was simply looking too hard. Later that night, when he got up to shower, I reached for his phone without thinking. The lock screen had a new code. We had never hidden passcodes from each other. That small discovery left my heart thudding in my throat. I set the phone back before he came out. I did not ask him about the code. I did not trust myself to keep my voice steady. Over the next few days, the feeling only worsened. Nathan started leaving earlier and coming home later. He said the company was entering a busy quarter and he had more clinics to visit. His explanations made sense, but they came too quickly, too smoothly. Sometimes he would put his phone face down on the counter when I walked into the room. Sometimes he would step into the hallway to finish a call. None of these things were dramatic, but they added up. The tension began to seep into other parts of my life. At work, Rick made another comment about women in construction needing to be careful or their husbands might start looking elsewhere. This time, it stung so sharply that I excused myself and stood behind the supply shed until I could breathe normally again. I hated that a stranger's joke could hit me so deeply, but it revealed how vulnerable this uncertainty had made me. One night, as I was closing the blinds, I caught sight of Nathan sitting in the car, talking to someone on his phone. His posture was relaxed, his voice low, his face softened in a way that did not look like frustration or professional stress. When he walked inside, he acted completely normal. He kissed me and asked what I wanted for dinner. Something inside me twisted, because the more normal he acted, the less normal it all felt. The day everything shifted came the following week. I had just come home from a long maintenance job on the outskirts of Peoria. My hands were sore, and my shoulders ached as I threw my jacket across the couch. Nathan was upstairs taking what he called a reset shower. I opened the kitchen trash and noticed something bright near the top. A folded receipt from a restaurant in Glendale. The date was from the previous night. Nathan had told me he ordered takeout and ate in his car while finishing paperwork. The receipt showed 2 entrees and a bottle of sparkling water. What unsettled me most was the tip. It was higher than Nathan ever gave for regular takeout. I held the slip of paper so tightly it crinkled. My mind bounced between explanations, but none of them settled. When Nathan came downstairs, he seemed completely at ease. He asked if I wanted to watch a movie. I stared at him for a long moment and then said I was going to bed early. The confusion on his face was genuine, which made me doubt myself all over again. That night I lay awake listening to the soft hum of the refrigerator and wondering who I was becoming. I had never been the suspicious type. I trusted easily, sometimes too easily. But now every small discrepancy felt like a crack forming under my feet. Then there was me, the girl who came home smelling like metal shavings and ozone. The girl who never understood why I had to smile politely at people I didn't trust. The girl who didn't marry early and didn't give them grandchildren on schedule. They called me independent, but the tone always made it sound like a flaw. The next afternoon after work, I sat in my truck again, too drained to turn on the engine. The sunlight was fading and casting long shadows across the parking lot. I called Sarah, She listened to the update, including the new passcode and the Glendale receipt. She listened without interrupting and then asked if I wanted her help checking his vehicle logs. It was a question that startled me. Sarah deals with people lying every day. She understood patterns better than anyone I knew. I hesitated because involving her felt like crossing a line, but the fear of not knowing was worse. I told her yes. She exhaled sharply as if relieved and told me she would run a basic check on the vehicle data that syncs through Nathan's dealership service. Nothing invasive, nothing illegal, just maintenance coordinates any owner can request. As I drove home, I tried to hold on to the idea that everything might still be harmless. That the restaurant receipt could be from a work meeting, that the new phone code could be accidental, that Victoria's warning could simply be the misguided concern of a sister who meant well. I wanted so badly to believe that. But as soon as I walked through the front door, I saw Nathan sitting on the couch scrolling through his phone. And he turned the screen away a little too quickly. The gesture was small, maybe subconscious, but it hit hard. Later that night, he told me he had been thinking about ways to reconnect, and that maybe giving each other a little breathing room would help us appreciate what we had. He spoke with sincerity, but the timing felt too neat, too convenient. I lay awake again, thinking of Victoria and her quiet words in the side yard, thinking of Sarah's warning about people who redirect suspicion, thinking of how my life had once felt so solid. I tried to pray, something I had not done in a long time. I asked for clarity, for truth, for strength. Instead, I felt only a growing heaviness, a quiet sense that something important was beginning to move beneath the surface of my marriage. And although I did not want to admit it, a small voice inside me whispered that the truth, whatever it was, would not stay hidden much longer. I told myself the truth would not stay hidden much longer, and the very next day the first pieces began to shift. I got home from work early after a transformer inspection wrapped ahead of schedule. The sun was still high and the house felt too quiet in that way that makes every small sound echo. I dropped my tool bag by the door and walked into the kitchen, trying to decide whether to cook something simple or just collapse on the couch. I was not expecting company, but the doorbell rang before I even opened the fridge. It was Victoria. She stood on my porch like she owned the place, smiling with that soft practiced concern she wore so easily. She said she had been in the area and thought she would stop by, but I knew immediately that was not true. She rarely visited unannounced. When she did, she always sent a text first. Today she acted as if wandering into my home was the most natural thing in the world. Still, I tried. I really did. When I married Nathan Brooks a year ago, my parents nearly fell over with joy. He was charming, good-looking in that clean-cut way, and worked as a manager for a medical equipment supplier. He knew how to talk to people, how to win over a room, how to look like the answer to a prayer. My parents adored him. Victoria approved of him. And for a moment, I let myself believe that everything was finally aligning. Maybe this was the part where my life settled down and became easy. I stepped aside to let her in, and she immediately gravitated toward the living room, running her hand along the back of the couch as if checking for dust. She said the house looked lovely. She said I seemed tired. She said Nathan seemed stressed when she saw him last Sunday. Then she looked at me carefully and asked if I had noticed any new changes. Her tone was gentle but too focused. I felt pinned to the sofa by her gaze, like she was studying me for cracks she expected to find. I told her work had been long and Nathan had been busy, nothing more. She nodded slowly as if filing that answer away for later. She offered to pray with me, a strange suggestion coming out of nowhere. When I hesitated, she squeezed my arm lightly and told me she did not want me suffering in silence. Her kindness felt like static humming behind my ribs. Something about it did not sit right. It felt like she was taking careful notes on every reaction I had. After she left, I sat at the dining table staring at my hands. I could not pinpoint what exactly had been wrong, but the entire visit carried that same uneasy feeling I had when she first warned me. It was as if she was trying too hard to guide me somewhere without actually saying where. Later that evening, Nathan came home later than usual, tired and quiet. He said he had one of those days that makes a man want to run away to the mountains. I watched him move around the kitchen, watched the way he avoided my eyes, watched how he loosened his tie and rolled his shoulders as if carrying invisible weight. I wanted to ask what was going on, but the question sat in my throat like a stone. Sunday came quickly. We all attended service at Riverside Community Church, something my parents insisted on. The sanctuary was crowded, filled with familiar faces, many of them older women who had known us since childhood. When Nathan and I walked in together, I felt a soft shift in the air. A few glances lingered too long. A pair of women whispered to each other with that polite smile people use when they want to hide judgment. I tried to ignore it. During the service, Victoria slid into the pew beside me, even though she usually sat nearer to the front with her husband, Ryan. She leaned close and whispered that I looked tired and asked if Nathan had been treating me well. Her hand lingered on my forearm longer than it needed to. I nodded, unsure what to say. She sighed and said she understood how stressful marriage could be. She added softly that sometimes the person you trust most can surprise you in ways you never expect. I pulled away slightly, unsettled by the layered meaning in her words. That hope lasted until one warm Sunday afternoon in late spring, when Victoria pulled me aside in my parents' backyard. After service, Mom insisted we all come to lunch at her house. It was one of those warm Arizona afternoons when the air feels thick, and everyone huddled inside around the kitchen island. Dad talked endlessly about a church fundraiser, Mom fussed over the food, and Nathan stood beside Ryan making conversation. I watched them closely. Ryan, who never hides his thoughts, looked tired in a way I had not noticed before. When Victoria walked by, he watched her with a faint tightness around his eyes, as if he had been worrying about something longer than he cared to admit. I moved to stand beside him and asked how he was holding up. He gave a small laugh and said that Victoria had been busy lately, working late, staying after school, helping with this and that. He said sometimes he wished she would slow down. Then he gave me a look that lasted a beat longer than normal. He did not say anything else, but his expression told me he was not as confident in her excuses as he wanted to be. Before I could ask anything, Victoria called him across the room in a bright, cheerful voice, and he left without finishing the thought. Later, I stood near the sliding door watching the yard. My parents had planted an herb garden that stretched along the fence, and for a moment I remembered summers when Victoria and I helped weed it. I tried to recall the last time she had spoken to me with genuine warmth. Every memory felt varnished, polished, too perfect to be real. Nathan joined me, stood close enough that I felt the heat of his shoulder. He said he was heading to the office early the next morning and asked if I would be home for dinner. My answer was simple, but my mind buzzed with questions. Every time he spoke to me now, there was a thin distance I could not name. We left early, and the entire drive home was quiet. The silence stretched between us like new territory neither of us wanted to claim. When we pulled into the garage, he lingered in the car for a moment, staring at the dashboard, before finally getting out. Inside the house, I excused myself and went upstairs to change. When I stepped into the hallway, I heard Victoria's voice echo in my mind. The same words from the side yard, the same tone she used this morning. I wondered why she kept circling back to Nathan, why she kept pressing the idea that something was wrong between us. Sisters worry, yes, but there was something overly deliberate in the way she delivered her concern, as if she wanted to guide my thoughts to a specific conclusion without fully revealing her intent. I went downstairs and found Nathan in the living room sorting through paperwork. He looked up and gave me a tired smile, one that did not fully reach his eyes. I asked if he was all right. He said he was just overwhelmed and needed a little breathing room, nothing more. I wanted to believe him, but the seed had already been planted, and now every small shift made me wonder. That night I could not sleep. I sat on the edge of the bed listening to the house breathe around me. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked and a car drove by, headlights flashing through the blinds. Nathan slept on his side of the bed with a slight frown on his face. His hand curled near his chest. I watched him for a long time, wondering why everything felt different even though nothing obvious had changed. The air smelled like cheap charcoal and overcooked ribs. My dad was fussing with the grill, declaring for the 100th time that no one in the family understood proper fire control. Mom and Victoria were arranging identical bowls of potato salad on the patio table like a competition nobody asked for. Nathan was inside with Ryan watching sports and trying to bond over teams neither of them truly cared about. The usual Carter family weekend. In the darkness, I remembered how Victoria had looked at him during lunch. A glance so quick I would have missed it if I had not already been uneasy. Something passed between them. Something small but present. A flicker of familiarity I could not explain. I tried to dismiss it as imagination, but the thought lingered, deep and unwelcome. The next morning, the unease carried into my workday. I kept losing track of my tools, forgetting small steps in routines I had done 1,000 times. My crew leader asked if I needed a break, and I almost said yes. Instead, I forced myself to focus. Worrying would not fix anything. It would only drain what energy I had left. When I got home that evening, Victoria was waiting in my driveway, leaning against her car as if she had been there a while. She straightened when she saw me, her expression soft but serious. She said she felt I needed support, that she had been thinking about me all day. She asked if Nathan had said anything unusual the night before. I told her he had been distant but nothing else. She nodded slowly, pressing her lips together, then told me she had seen him at church, talking to a woman she did not recognize. She said the woman looked too comfortable with him, then quickly added that she hoped she was wrong. Her concern was starting to feel rehearsed. She walked me to the door and lingered on the porch, giving me that same searching look she had given me at lunch. Then she squeezed my hand, wished me strength, and left. I watched her taillights fade down the street. The evening air felt heavy again, and a tightness settled between my ribs that I could not name. Something was building, something I could feel but not yet see. And the more Victoria inserted herself into my marriage, the harder it became to separate truth from whatever she wanted me to believe. I drove into the garage with the feeling that the world had tilted a little more since the last time I had stepped out of my truck. The porch light flicked on automatically, casting a yellow wash across the driveway where Victoria had stood just an hour earlier. I locked the truck, walked inside, and tried to shake the echo of her voice out of my mind, but it clung to me like desert dust after a long shift. Nathan was upstairs. I could hear the water running, steady and calm, the way it always sounded when he took his end-of-day shower. That sound used to comfort me. Now it made something in my chest tighten. I was carrying a stack of plates outside when I felt Victoria's hand on my arm. It wasn't rough, but it had that purposeful grip she used when she wanted something. I dropped my bag by the stairs and walked toward the kitchen. My phone buzzed twice. Sarah had sent a message asking if I wanted her to pull the routine maintenance logs on Nathan's car the next morning. I stared at the screen for a long moment, then typed back that I did. She told me she would let me know once she got the basic timestamps. The house felt unnervingly still. When Nathan came downstairs, he looked freshly shaved and relaxed, as if he had stepped out of one world into another. He asked how my day had gone. I told him it was long. I asked him how his was. He said it had been hard to focus because work had become overwhelming. He rubbed the back of his neck and said he wanted us to have a night with less pressure. Then he kissed my forehead and went to heat leftovers. Nothing he said felt wrong, but none of it settled me. The next morning, after he left for an early appointment, I sat with my first cup of coffee and waited for the tightness in my chest to ease. It did not. The sunlight came in soft through the blinds, casting long stripes across the kitchen counter. I kept thinking about what Sarah had said. Patterns reveal truth, not words, not good intentions, patterns. Around 10 she called. She explained that the car's connected service had recorded several maintenance syncs in the past 2 weeks. She said there were coordinates from evenings Nathan had claimed to be stuck in extra meetings. She added that nothing pointed directly to one address, but there were repeated stops near Glendale on days he told me he had been nowhere near that area. The word repeated made my stomach sink. I thanked her, promised to keep her updated, and hung up. When I set down my phone, I realized my hands were shaking. I tried to carry on with my day. I did laundry. I cleaned the counters. I reorganized the pantry even though it did not need it. Anything to keep my mind from wandering back to that map of coordinates. But when I opened the trash bin to throw out a grocery bag, a small clear lipstick cap sat at the top. I did not recognize it. I stared at it long enough that the edges blurred. I took a picture and sent it to Sarah. She asked if I wore that shade. I said no. She told me not to panic, but to keep watching. In the early afternoon, Victoria texted. She said she had been thinking about our conversation and wanted me to know she was praying for clarity for me. She ended with a heart emoji she rarely used. I stared at the message, uneasy again. She appeared whenever doubt grew strongest. She watered it, fed it, acted like she was nurturing something good while carefully bending it in the direction she wanted.